Hi students, this is Ms. Wildy. This is part 2 of the Chapter 12 Industry Visit video lecture. So we're going to talk about modern industry in this section. How has industry changed since Ford? Remember that Fordist models use an assembly line. Usually the production is done in one building, but post-Fordist or the global division of labor, flexible production, that's all going to be done all over the world. So you may have a product that starts, that raw materials come from 12 different places, and they're manufactured in 6 different factories all over the world in 6 different countries, and then they're distributed out around the world in multiple different countries. And so that's sort of that global division of labor. The other sort of concept they talk about is just-in-time delivery. And it used to be, and you may or may not know this, but it used to be that factories would have rooms that they devoted to having their materials, their raw materials, their tools, all of that. It's usually raw materials. And it was keeping an inventory of those. And because of the globalized world that we have, because we can get things shipped to us within days, even maybe within hours, there doesn't need to be these storehouses of or warehouses that are storing this inventory. If you need something, it can be shipped to you the next day, and so companies save a lot of money by keeping just what they need for short-term production, and then new parts or new resources are shipped quickly when it's needed. And you don't have to have as much space devoted to the storage units is sort of what that idea is. So that's changed a part of how industry has worked. The other idea, especially we've talked about distance decay and this idea of the friction of distance, that the longer the distance, the more cost, the more time. That doesn't apply anymore. Again, we've had this thing called time-space compression, where because of our technologies, because of our communication and our transportation, things are connected so much more readily that you don't have that same issue of friction of distance. Things can, again, be shipped to you within days. You can get information in seconds. You can trade with places, and if you can't get it from here, you can get it from 12 other places if you need it. So again, that has a whole lot to do in how industry goes today. They talk about 2 particular companies, in this section, Nike and IKEA. And they talk about how Nike was based out of Beaverton, Oregon, and it still is. That's where its headquarters are. But no Nike shoe is manufactured in Oregon. None of it takes place in Oregon. They have their sales, they have their headquarters for decision making, they have designing of shoes, but no shoes are actually manufactured in Oregon. It's mostly done in Asian countries because of lower labor costs. The other thing about IKEA is that it's a Swedish company, yet, and really it developed as a company. One man was selling pins door to door, I think, and he slowly started to add more inventory, and it became this company where they now are the largest producer of furniture in the world. So once again, we have sort of this movement and changeover of how manufacturing happens over time. The other thing about IKEA that I think is interesting is that they are one of the best factories for using green energy, meaning solar and wind energy. And they are also working with the UN in terms of housing refugees, which I think is relevant to what we talk about in Chapter 3 with migration. Again, the globalized world means that now industries are now having a part to play in the refugees and migrations around the world. And that was unheard of before this. This is all that modern industry. They talk about televisions, about how it used to be manufactured only in the United States, in core regions, and that's really, again, no longer the case. Most have shifted across the world. China makes a lot of televisions. Korea makes a lot of televisions. And that global sourcing and outsourcing. One of the things that is has a part to play in how we move as a society now in terms of industry is this idea of there are even companies called BPOs that if you want to start your own business, you can go to them and say, hey, this is what I want to manufacture. They will go find a factory somewhere in the world that's willing to make your product for very cheaply And they are sort of a middleman between you and the manufacturer. You don't even have to ever go to the factory. And that's sort of how industry is changing even more so. We also have regional trade agreements, like the World Trade Organization, WTO, has a part to play in global trade and free trade. We also deal with energy, and energy has a lot to do with where industry happens. We've talked about SEZs before, special economic zones, and remember that we've talked about China creating these SEZs where there isn't clean energy. You don't have to, you can pollute. You can dump toxic waste. They do not care. And that has also influenced manufacturing in the world. So again, these influences have really changed the way that the world works. And we'll talk a little bit at the very end about sort of this what's happening with the semi-peripheral. Core is now known for high tech, although even then, you know, the United States is a high tech country, and we have robots that do things, and the idea is that we're slowly going to have no jobs for people because robots will do it all. And that's going to be a consideration for the future. But even with that, since the manufacturing jobs are now going to the peripheral countries, what's happening with the semi-peripheral? They used to do more of the manufacturing, and now they're becoming more of the core. So we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Unfortunately, one of the side effects of the modern industry is this idea of deindustrialization. It's when companies have to leave because they go somewhere else where it's cheaper, and that means that then that region becomes areas of high unemployment. There's usually lots of poverty. We've talked about Detroit with reference to this as being a city that's gone bankrupt because there's no industry there, and people have high unemployment. This is a picture of Liverpool in England. Remember, we talked about Liverpool as being a major manufacturing area of Great Britain, and it's not anymore. It's been deindustrialized, mostly because of China and other semi-peripheral and peripheral countries gaining that manufacturing labor force. Again, with China, we also need to talk about these Asian tigers. So again, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. These are all areas of major newly industrialized zones or newly industrialized countries. And China has several districts. I mentioned several in the other video lecture. Places like around Beijing, around Shanghai. And again, once again, with these SEZs, these areas where you have cheaper labor and no environmental considerations. There's no restrictions on what you can do with your trash, with your pollutants, all of those things. So the Asian tigers are considerations, and then we also have our baby tigers, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and even I've seen Philippines being mentioned as one of these baby tigers, these up-and-coming countries where industry is taking off and becoming more of a world leader as a result. They're becoming industrial leaders. So we're left with the service economy, because again, that's sort of what was considered what the core countries were going to do. When all those people lost their jobs with manufacturing, it was said, well, you can work in the service industry. Well, even that's changing a little bit. We tend to see service economy like transportation, banking, retail, certainly with computer technology or computer service. We talked about that in previous chapters. And so again, it's put on the core country to be more of the service sector, the quaternary, the quinary, leaving the primary and secondary to your peripheral or semi-peripheral countries. New influences on location are things like information technology. Energy sources are less tied to it so much. It's more about your market accessibility, transportation, again, like we said, and information communications. And they talk a whole lot about Walmart, and we've watched a video as well, where Walmart is based out of Bentonville, Arkansas. And so as a result, they have required the companies that sell products in Walmart to locate near them too, because they say, if you want to put your product in our store, then you need to come talk to us here. And so those companies have now moved their headquarters down to Arkansas as well, to be closer to Walmart's headquarters. And that changes also the way that the service industry works, and the associated companies that work with these major headquarters like Walmart. And you also develop things called high-tech corridors, things like Silicon Valley in California, the Route 128 corridor in Boston, that's where MIT is. You typically have technopoles near universities and near airports as a result of the need for the high-tech expertise of new graduates from universities, and as well as having people coming in on the airports to discuss their new ideas, their new strategies, all of those kind of things. Plano, Texas is known for its telecommunications, telecom corridor just north of Dallas, which has made, again, that idea of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Plano now becoming a megalopolis within Texas. It doesn't feel like there's much of a difference between those cities. They all become one major mega city as a result of this service technology and service industry. The last thing that's discussed in this chapter, and we've also talked about this previously, is tourism. Remember, we talked about that it's beneficial for the international corporations, not so much for the local area. They lose a lot of culture. They don't get paid as well. The corporations tend to use up resources, water, trees, energy uses, but it's still one of the fastest growing parts of industry. East and Southeast Asia are on the rise for tourism. And the other thing that has happened is areas that deindustrialized, like we talked about before, like Liverpool, like Detroit, and in this case, Duisburg in Ruhr Valley deindustrialized. And it means that they have now turned to tourism to try and bring in more money back into this region. So that's true for Duisburg. I wouldn't say so much for Detroit, although a little bit, and not yet for Liverpool, but possibly in the future. So last part, future of industry. Globalization is not going away. It will continue to affect industry and economies all over the world. They discussed the subprime mortgage crisis, and that was something that happened in the United States, but because of globalization, it affected the entire world. Same thing with other industries, not just banking. This is going to happen more and more. When you have something happen at a local level, it affects the global level. And then the last thing, which I kind of touched on earlier, was this idea that countries that have taken on the low-wage labor jobs, like India, like China, like Singapore, all these Asian tigers, for example, they are now getting richer and becoming core countries. And so that means that not only do the United States and Western European countries that use these countries for their manufacturing, now they have to compete with India, with China, with Singapore, for other countries, the poorer countries, peripheral countries, for that manufacturing and for that labor. I always bring up the idea of India. My husband works in tech service, in technical support, and it used to be all done in the United States. And over the last 20 years, it's moved to India because it's cheaper labor. In fact, his entire team is in India. But what's happening is that now those workers are more experienced. They're becoming software developers. They're becoming owners of their own computer companies, which means that now his company and other companies in the United States are having to look elsewhere, because now India is joining the competition to find cheaper labor in other places. This is what's going to keep happening in the future as well, not just with computer technology, but with other industries as well. So I hope this has helped you with learning for Chapter 12 for industry. Please come into class and bring any questions that you have that seem confusing or just need some further clarification. Hope you've enjoyed. Thanks. Bye.